This is a prop shaft out of a 2006 Sportsman X2, and it had bad U-joints in it. And I've already driven the bad U-joints out, and thought I would make a little video about installing the new ones. And of course, taking the old ones out is pretty much the reverse of installing the new ones. But I was going through YouTube trying to find a video of somebody changing these things out, and I was unable to find one. So I'm kind of going backwards on this, because I'm going to put a U-joint in this, and then I'm going to install it back in the quad. But at least you can kind of see from the process going backwards what I had to do to get it out in the first place. Hopefully that will help somebody else later on, until somebody puts a decent video on YouTube about how to do this. So let me get the pieces parts out, and then I'll come back. All right, what I had noticed was that there was some play in between these two yokes. You could turn one of them and the other one wouldn't turn right away. And what that normally means is that these little roller bearings, which are inside these bearing cups, which go on to the end of the U-joints, that they're bad. Now, these stock Polaris U-joints, which you'll notice is there is no grease fitting on them anywhere. All right, so nothing to push the water back out of them if water gets in there. The replacement I got these at O'Reilly's. With tax, I think they're a little less than 15 bucks a piece. But these come with a grease fitting that's going to screw right in the middle of that. So when we install these into the yoke, we want to install it so that the grease fittings are facing each other. So this one I've already changed. All right, so the grease fitting is facing that way, and then this one, the grease fitting will be facing that way after I get it installed. So let me get set up here, and I'll show you the next step of putting these things back together. Again, kind of going backwards here a little bit, because they're already taken apart. I don't know if it's the same for these ATV prop shafts as it is with cars. But with a car, you also want to mark the yokes so that you know how they came apart, because they're balanced that way. So if you put them back together with one of the yokes flipped over the opposite way that they came apart, on a car, you may actually get some vibration in the drive shaft that way. So just to be safe, I did the same thing. And all I did was put a couple little scratch marks on here and a couple of scratch marks up here to match up, so that I know which ends went with which, so I know that this yoke is the right way. And on this other one, there was a number 2 on here, and you may not be able to see it, but I scratched the number 2 up here so that I know to match those two back together. Taking them out, these little clips here actually go on the inside of the bearing cups on this. Some car drive shafts will actually have it on the outside of the bearing cups when it's installed, so they'll actually be sitting up here. But what we have to do is install this into the yoke and then put the bearing clips in afterwards. So let me get set up for this next step, and then we'll show you how to do that. Okay, what I've done is I've taken the opposite bearing cups off of those, and these are all the same size. On some cars, one side might be bigger than the other, but on these are all the same size, so you don't have to worry about that. What I did was I took the 2 bearing cups off, and you have to do that to be able to slide this into the yoke. And then at that point, you can put the bearing cups back on from the outside. So let me get this thing to that point, since I'm kind of working one-handed here, and I'll show you what's going on. Prior to doing that, I want to go ahead and talk about the inside of these. After pulling the old ones out, I cleaned up the inside of these with some PB Blaster. You want to make sure that there's no big burrs or dents or anything in there, and clean up any crud that's in there to make it easier to get the bearing cups in and out. You know, the old bearing cups out, new bearing cups in. Okay, so I tilted that in, and I went ahead, and the bearing cup falls in that far without any sort of pressure or anything on it. I just want to talk about these bearing cups. If you look inside of them, you can see all the needle bearings in there. You have to be really careful not to lay down any of those needle bearings. So if you lay down the needle bearings and then try to press all this together, you're going to wind up breaking some of the needle bearings, which I've done, actually, on this job. So let me go ahead and set this cup up properly, going on the opposite side here, and then I'll get the press ready, and I'll show you how we do that. Okay, what I did on the other side, or on both sides, when I took the old ones out, is I actually used some sockets that I had, and put a socket that's about the same size as the cup on one side, then put a socket that's big enough for the cup to go down in on the other side of it. So you've got to set up like this with this on top of here, and I drove it through with a hammer all right, until the far cup falls off inside of here, and then you take it off and you flip it over, and then the inside of this fits over the yokes, and you drive it back the other way until the other cup falls on here, and that's how I got them out. I really don't see any problem with driving them out that way, but the problem if you try to drive them back in that way is, again, these little needle bearings. If these needle bearings fall out or lay down or whatever, well, now you're trying to find the needle bearings on the ground, or you know, if you lay one down in here and try to press it back together, you're going to break one of these needle bearings. So I don't think that hammering it back together is a good idea. But what I did, once I got these out of O'Reilly's, is they've got this loaner tool. All right, this is actually for ball joints, all right, to put ball joints back in. And I'm going to use it as a press to press these cups back on without that constant hammering of trying to tap them back together, which would make all those little needle bearings fall out of there. All right, so this is a little space that's going to go on one side. All right, so I've got it set up to where I've got part of it to where it's not too big for this, and I may actually have to go back and again use some of these sockets to press it back together. All right, then the other side is going to be into this shaft, all right, which spins on there, and that's going to push this back in. So a couple of sockets, and let me get this thing set up, and I'll show you what we're doing here. All right, so here it all is kind of set up. Obviously, I'm going to need to do this with two hands. But again, this driver plunger up here is smaller than the cup, so that's going to work. And then down at the bottom, I've got a 15mm socket down there, which again is smaller than the outside diameter of the cup, not too much smaller. And the fitting hole for the grease zert is facing towards the shaft, so those two fittings will be facing each other. So now all I've got to do is put a 7/8" socket on the end of this thing and line it all up, and then start cranking it, and the cup should go in. All right, one cup's probably going to go in faster than the other, and I'll kind of address that here in a second so that you can see what to do with that. So let me pause this thing, and I'm going to go ahead and tighten this thing up with a ratchet and show you when we get to a point to where I can put on one of the C-clips. All right, you can see that the bearing cup on the bottom is going in faster than the bearing cup on top, and that's fine, but we're going to keep pressing it in until I can see the groove. This is the old bearing cup, but until I can see this groove on there so that I can feed one of the snap rings into it. And then once that one's in far enough to where I can do that, then I'm going to take all this apart, and then I'm going to press this cup in further so that I can do the same thing on the other side. All right, so now I've got it pressed in far enough to where we can see that snap ring groove on the other side, and again, the other side hasn't gone in far enough yet. So we're going to go ahead and put the snap ring on there. The best way that I found to do that is it needs to go in from this side over here, because there's actually stuff in the way over here, so it can't go in from any other side. But you put it on here into the groove, and then just tap the end of this with a hammer, and it'll snap right on. And again, that's impossible to do with one hand, so I'm going to have to pause the camera again and snap that on there, and then I'll show you where we're at again. All right, so again, I put that on there. You want to make sure you keep a hand on there or a towel around it or something, because these things can go flying over the other side of the garage, and you're going to have a hard time finding them. All right, but now I put this one snap ring on there, and now that's actually going to act as a stop. All right, so now we need to press this cup in until I get the other snap ring on, but we no longer want anything pushing on this side, so we don't want the socket on the bottom. All right, so we can put this thing back together like this, all right, without the socket and the stopper down here. And then this is going to push this cup in until I get this other snap ring on. So let's do that. I'll try to do a little bit of this one-handed so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on here. All right, so I've got the ratchet on there and the cup on there. And as I ratchet this thing in, the cup's getting pressed in. All right, let me go back to two hands. All right, so now I've pushed in that other cup far enough to where you can see the snap ring groove on that side. All right, so it presses this snap ring up against this ear of the yoke. All right, and then pushes it in far enough to where I can get that snap ring in. So now I need to take off the ball joint press back off here and then snap the other snap ring in there, and we're halfway done. All right, both snap rings are on now, so we're halfway done. I also want to note that I left the grease zerk fitting out, and I know sometimes they're a pain in the butt to put in after everything is assembled, but I left it out because you're taking these cups off and on, you're actually pushing pressure through, and I want to leave I want to leave a place for that pressure to go. So sometimes what you'll see some grease squirting out of here as you're working on these things, pulling the different end caps off and everything. But that's why I have not put the zerk fitting in yet. So let me go ahead and put the other side together real quick without videotaping it, and I'll be back. All right, so I've got the other part back on, the other yoke back on there, and you can see that this moves in both directions pretty easy. All right, and this is the ones I got from O'Reilly's 338, and 338 is the same. Napa is a common one people talk about. I don't know if this is the exact same one they get from Napa or not, but it's the same part number. But I liked that one. I saw it made in the USA. It's kind of odd they got to say it in other languages. All right. Anyhow, it's 338 U-joint, and moves pretty good in both directions. This other one I did last night. All right, and what I found is that it moves pretty good in one direction, but in the other direction, not so much. All right, and this is a PSI? EPI. It's an EPI one. All right, I don't know if I got the part number over here or not. There it is. It's an EPI one that I bought from one of the local fix-it shops here. And what can happen when you're installing these sometimes is that these bearing cups have friction between the bearing cup and the yoke. All right, so if you have both these bearing cups pushed in real hard, it's actually binding on the end of this part of the U-joint. So the cup is pressed all the way up against this on both sides. All right, so it moves good this way, which means that these cups are good. All right, but doesn't move good that way, which means these cups are tight. So what we have to do is we have to support both sides of this yoke, all right, and then tap down gently right here. You don't want to mash it with a big hammer or anything. You want to tap down gently right here, all right, which will push this yoke up and push this cap up. And then we need to flip it over and do the same thing, and that will move the cap out on both sides, and hopefully it's not hard to move anymore. If it's still hard to move, I bought an extra one of these, and I'll stick one of those in there. So let's try that out, and we'll see if that works or not. All right, so what I found is that this tie rod end tool actually is just the right width. All right, so again, this is one of the cups that's binding, and the other side. So I'm going to put it across here so that both of the ends, both of these ears of the other yoke are supported, and then I'm going to tap it right in here with a hammer on both sides, and hopefully that will free it up. All right, so here's that stiff joint. After I did that, you can see that it moves good that way, it moves good that way, so that worked. We actually pushed the cups deeper into the yokes, and now everything is good. So now all I need to do is screw the zerk fitting on this side we just did, grease up both sides, and then I'll show some of the installation so you guys will get an idea about what it took to take it apart. There's a little lesson on grease guns before I put this in there. I always had a hard time getting the grease gun to stay on well enough to get the grease into the fittings, so I was always trying to push down on it. Well, here recently, hang on, there it goes. Here recently, somebody had pointed out that there's these little fingers down inside there, and if you tighten this thing up, screw it on, it actually tightens those fingers onto the ball joint to hold it in better. So I may be the only person in the world that doesn't know that, but just in case there's somebody else out there with the same problem with these grease guns that I've been having, now you'll know the answer. Okay, back in here is the output side of the transmission. All right, get a better perspective here. All right, so the shaft that sticks out of the transmission, and the slip yoke, the one with the grease zerk fitting on it, goes onto that. All right, on the other end of this is a differential. Now the differential has a roll pin, all right, that goes through a hole in this yoke. All right, so it goes through there, all right, and through that, and that keeps this yoke from sliding off of the input shaft to the differential. All right, so to put it in, what I need to do is slide the slip yoke onto that shaft beyond where it would normally be riding. So I'm going to shove it up that way pretty much as far as it will go. All right. Until I can get the end of this, clear the end of that shaft so that I can slide it onto the shaft. Obviously, I want to line up the hole in this with a hole in that. And before doing that, I'm going to go back to the auto parts store to drop off that tie rod, or I'm sorry, ball joint driver. And I'm going to see if they've got a high-grade bolt that will fit through there into here, so I'm not driving this roll pin. I'm not into reusing roll pins anyway. That way I'm not driving this roll pin out. Next time I'm trying to do that and just get a nut with a nylon insert in it, a locking nut to put on the shaft. That looked a whole lot more rustier when I took it apart on the splines of that. But again, PB blaster and a little bit of elbow grease. Looks like I need to do a little bit more PB blastering down there, but I had to do that just to get it off there. It wasn't easy to get off there in the first place. All right, so that makes it all sound easy, but I actually had to fish it up through here, all right, to actually get it out. And I had to take my tie rod loose. You don't want to turn that because you're going to have to be readjusting everything later on. And they built this thing in a way to where it's really hard to get to. So the shaft runs from there to there, but what's missing in here, what I had to take out, is my battery cradle. All right, so the battery cradle has a screw here, bolt, screw, whatever you want to call it. There's one here and two on the other side, all right, that hold it down. All right, then of course the battery goes on top of that. By the way, this battery is one of those YUASA ones. And if you look on it, this is an 06 Polaris. This is the actual battery from when they built this thing. So here it is 7 years later, and the battery's still good. So I'm going to guess at least back 7 years ago, that was a good brand of battery. And this is a non-spillable, so I guess you'd call that the non-serviceable ones these days. So I can't find anywhere on it where it says AGM, but I'm guessing this is a AGM battery if they had that technology 7 years ago. But anyhow, so after I get the shaft back in, I'm going to have to bolt the battery tray back in, put the battery back in. All right. I also took out the footwell so I can work. So the footwell is going to have to go back in, also the right footwell on here. And I have the foot brake master loose. That really has nothing to do with this project. My foot brake master, this plunger is not popping back out. So I'm going to have to take that apart to see what's going on. Figure while I'm in here, I might as well go ahead and try to work on that also. So I probably won't take any more videos of this until I pretty much have it all back together. But again, that's the differential input. The shaft's going to run across here. That's the battery strap, by the way, that holds the battery in. Over to here. So we want to feed it back through up in here and push it onto the output shaft of the transmission, and I'll lube that up a little bit, get some more PB blaster on there and clean that up. All right, so we're going to push it onto the transmission output shaft as far as it will go until we can get the end of this yoke clear of that. All right, lining up the holes. And again, I'm going to put a bolt back in that hole instead of that roll pin that I had to drive out. All right, on the roll pin driving out, I actually used some different size bolts and sockets and an extension to actually drive it out, and I wound up using this pin that I had from who knows what to drive it out. But pin punches would be good, and I've got to sit around here somewhere. I just couldn't find them, so I was using anything and everything that I could find. But that pin is what I used to actually drive the roll pin out of that front yoke there. So, thanks for watching. All right, just a couple notes. Again, this is the ippy one. You can see it was almost $23. I looked at the receipt on the ones that I got from O'Reilly's, those 338s, and those were $13.71 each. So all things equal, if they both last as long as each other, then obviously we're better off going to O'Reilly's. And I believe Napa's got a PUC 338, same thing. It's got a Zerk fitting on it, and from what I gather, that one is even closer to $10. So it's somewhere between 10 and 12, I think. So I think everything's a little bit cheaper than the ones that are made for it. I mentioned about putting a bolt in here. I realized that this bolt doesn't hold anything together per se. The purpose of the bolt is to keep the yoke from sliding off of the splined input shaft. All right, so I pick up this bolt, and it's a little long, so I'll take it over to the bench grinder and just to make sure. But you want to make sure if anything's sticking out that you've got space around here to where it's not hitting anything. All right, especially if you're near your transmission. You don't want to be making a hole in your transmission, which I guess is common, not common, but not uncommon for the pins to back out if you have a rear prop shaft, which this one doesn't. This one's got the transmission and differential all in one unit. But if you have a rear prop shaft and that pin backs out, then the end of that pin starts nicking against your transmission as it keeps backing out more and more, and pretty soon you got a hole in your transmission. So people use the bolt because they're easier to get in and out, and they don't back out. So bolt size, M8s seem to fit if you want to go metric. M8 by 50, I believe was the size. But I got some 5/16. These are automotive grade, which I would kind of recommend, even though, as I mentioned, it's not really holding anything. It's just keeping this yoke from sliding off the shaft. And the actual drive part is the splines on the shaft and then the splines on the inside of the yoke. But I would still recommend using some sort of an automotive grade bolt. So 5/16, 18 thread, 18 pitch thread by 2 inches long. And it wasn't anything between 1.5 inches and 2 inches, and these are probably about 1/4 inch too long. So I'll just take them over to the bench sander, bench grinder, and shorten them up 1/4 inch. So, all right, and again, if I run into something on here that when I'm installing this thing back in here, then I'll do that. I just got back from bringing that ball joint press driver back and picking up the bolts. So, thanks. All right, prop shaft's back in. All right, got my bolt in there. All right, there's a Zerk fitting on the slip joint here because it had never been serviced before. I don't know, never hasn't by me. I've owned this thing for about 1.5 years. It took about 6 or 7 pumps on my grease guns, my guess, before I could start to see the grease coming out inside the yoke here. So that should be full of grease now. All right, so now I need to put the battery tray back in and the wheel well back on after I fix the master. And that should be done. Again, thanks for watching. Everything's nice and tight now. There was a whole lot of play in these prior to changing out these U-joints. So again, thanks for watching.